everybody, it's Taheerah. Thanks so much for joining me today. I'm actually jumping for joy to be here because I'm on the W+9 blog today. I have been a huge fan of W+9 since day one, and I could not believe my eyes when Dawn invited me to guest with her, so thanks so much for inviting me, Dawn. I'm going to be creating this cute little card featuring some of the recently released sets from W+9, including the 2 different Petunias sets, and I'm going to be combining them in a sort of laissez-faire watercolour technique, and I really hope that Dawn doesn't cringe too much when she sees this because I am nowhere near as good a watercolourist as her, not even by half. But hopefully this technique will show you that even those of us who aren't experts can create gorgeous little masterpieces like this. It's really not that difficult at all, so let's get started. I'm using the Modern Petunias set on the left, which is an outline set, and the Petunia Builder set on the right. Normally you'd use the Builder set if you wanted to stamp solid images and the outline set for colouring techniques, but I'm going to show you how well they work together. I'm starting with one of the largest outline images and I'm going to ink it up in milled lavender distress ink. Normally when I do a no-line watercolouring technique I would use antique linen, but I want a colour that's quite close to the finished colour of the flowers, so I'm going to use milled lavender here. I'm swatching the other colours that I'm going to be using for this flower onto my desk and adding some water to activate them. I've got milled lavender, shaded lilac, twisted citron and seedless preserves, and I'm starting with a clean wash of water on one of the petals just to activate some of that distress ink and pull some of the colour in from the edges of the petals and the centre. And then I can add a first wash of colour using the milled lavender and shaded lilac inks. I'm just touching the centre of each petal and the edges and letting the water spread the colour for me. And between each step I'm using my heat tool just to dry the petals so that I have some definition between each of them. Once I've done that, I can continue around the rest of the flower, first of all adding some clean clear water and then just touching the edges and the centres of those petals. In case you're wondering which brushes I'm using, and again not at all an expert, but I'm using a number 5 round brush for the first wash of colour, and I'm going to be adding some details later on with a number 3 flat brush and a quadruple 0 tiny weeny detail brush. So now I've got my first wash of colour, I'm going to add some detail now, and I'm using the solid image from Petunia Builder to add the detail to the centre. I've inked it up with wild mango ink here, and you can already see the extra detail that that's given. I'm going to add some more watercolouring now, and so I've added some water to the centre, and here I am with my number 3 flat brush and my quadruple 0 weenie brush, and I'm adding some detail with some seedless preserves ink and with the twisted citron ink in the centre. And I'm giving that a dry between each step again so that I can add some final detail with the quadruple 0 brush right in the centre. And just look at the depth we've managed to build in that one flower from just a few washes of colour and some stamped detail. Awesome, isn't it? So now you've seen me do one of these flowers, I'm going to send this into faster motion for the other ones because you've seen the technique. I'm going to be using a real mixture of colours to give a springtime feel to my card. So for the yellow petunia I'm using mustard seed ink, and I'm using that for the detail as well as for the stamping. And I'm going to be using the wild mango ink again for stamping the centre and adding some detail with the twisted citron ink. And for the darker flower, I'm going to be using seedless preserves ink to do the inking, which is a very dark colour, I know, but you'll see with this technique that when we add the water and spread the colour out that we get a really nice graduation of colour from the edges and to the centre, which is really, really gorgeous. I'm going to be stamping one more tiny flower as well in the milled lavender and adding some of the details similar to what you've seen before. I'm using picked raspberry ink as well to add some of the finer details in the centre and to add some shading and differentiation of colour for the darker flower and for the milled lavender flower. So let's watch me go in super high speed! So I know we might all wish that we could watercolour this fast, but actually it's better that you take your time and go slowly so that you can add those details and let each step dry in between, or use your heat tool if you're impatient like me. So I've slowed down a little bit just to show you what I'm doing with this bud flower because it's a little bit different. I've stamped again in the seedless preserves ink, but I'm going to be using the twisted citron ink just at the bottom and letting that blend in with the seedless preserves. If you've looked closely at buds, you've probably noticed that there's actually some green still left over in the petals before the flower has fully formed, so that's what I'm trying to replicate in the flower here. Once I've actually added that detail and let the colours blend in together, I'm drying between each step as before, and then I'm going to be adding some detail to the centre. Once again using the seedless preserves for the wash of colour, and then using my tiny brush to add some detail with the same colour, just to add some depth to the centre. So I've skipped ahead to the next step after painting my final flower, and I'm fussy cutting out all of my petunias. Now, these sets do actually come with coordinating dies, so you can use those, but I'm actually one of those weirdos who enjoys fussy cutting. I find it rather therapeutic, so I'm going to fussy cut all of these images. And one advantage of that is that I can actually control the amount of border that I have around each image, or no border as you might prefer. I'm going to be trimming all of these out, and then I'm going to be assembling these onto a card in just a second. I've already prepared a 3.5 square inch card base from some white cardstock, and I'm going to put it into my MISTI where I've already lined up my stamps ready to use. I'm using this big top background stamp, which is great for adding some subtle detail, and I've inked this up in some fairy dust ink. I want to add some extra depth to the colour, but not too much, so I've inked up again in Sea Breeze ink, stamped it onto some scratch paper, and then stamped onto my card base. Next comes my leaves and my sentiment, and I'm going to ink up the sentiment with some VersaFine ink and the leaves with some crushed olive distress ink. And I'm just going to double stamp the sentiment because I didn't get it all in one go. And now I'll do some simple watercolouring using some crushed olive distress ink. This card base is not made from watercolour cardstock, so I'm being very careful with the minimal amount of water and ink because I don't want the paper to pill. Once I've painted my leaves, I'll give my card base a quick blast with my heat gun, and just for some added interest, I'm going to add some glimmer mist for some subtle splatter to the card base. So I'm masking off the sentiment, I don't want to get splatter on there, adding some splatters, and now I can assemble my card. I'm using some dimensional glue gel. This is Pinflair glue gel, and it's great for adding custom dimension because you can vary the amount of glue on the back. I'm just using this to assemble my flowers in place, adding different amounts of dimension so that the flowers pop up on top of each other, finishing off with that bud tucked underneath between the flowers. And as a final finishing touch, I'm just adding some sequins from Pretty Pink Posh. These are in coordinating colours that go with the flowers perfectly. I'm just dotting them in place with some multi-matte medium, and that finishes the card for today. I've had such a great time showing you this card on the W+9 blog. If you like what you see, please do give this video a thumbs up, and please also follow me and subscribe to my blog and my YouTube. Thanks so much again, Dawn, for having me. I've had a wonderful time, and I hope you all have an amazing day. Bye!